Ryan Eskridge is the Vice President of Product at The Athletic and joins us today for the very first episode of the podcast. Ryan, welcome to Get a Load of This.
Thanks, Karan. Thrilled to be here.
Always thrilled to talk to you too, Ryan. But let's start here. One of the most fascinating things about you to me is that you're a fan of both Michigan football and North Carolina basketball, but you neither attended those schools nor have lived in those states. So how did your complicated web of sports allegiances develop?
You're cutting to the most embarrassing question first. I like it. So I grew up in central New Jersey, so most closely affiliated with New York professional sports teams. I was a Yankees fan, for example. For college, there are a lot of big college fan bases in New Jersey, but there wasn't really one dominant, like everyone's a Rutgers fan, or like if you live in the middle of Pennsylvania and everyone's a Penn State fan. So for me, a lot of my college TV habits were determined by what channel my dad was watching. So my dad always had Big Ten football on, and Michigan was on all the time. He was from Baltimore, so he had Maryland basketball on, who was, as you know, at the time in the ACC. And so because my dad was an Orioles fan and I was a Yankees fan, my thing was rooting against my dad's teams, not with them. So for North Carolina, it was a rival. For Maryland, for Michigan, they were just on TV every week. Both of them happened to have really great uniforms, which didn't help.
True, very true.
At the time growing up, I don't think I realized that, hey, maybe one reason why they're on TV all the time is that they tend to be pretty good. I just saw they were on TV all the time. They seemed like great teams, cool uniforms, and I've ridden with them ever since.
It must be interesting that you have these allegiances that originally were from different conferences, but like there's like this slow merging. Like you mentioned, like Maryland was part of the ACC, and now Maryland like plays Michigan on a regular basis as part of the Big Ten. I mean, I don't know if they'll eventually call it the Big 20. It doesn't seem like they're going that way. How do you find that is affecting sort of how you think about those allegiances, those fandoms, or just because they go so far back, they're just embedded in the way that you think now?
Not the allegiances, but I would say the broader changes going on in sports. If I would include realignment, and not just realignment, but mega conferencization of college sports, with the more frustrating parts of it, not the players getting paid parts of NIL, but what NIL is then doing to the transfer portal and things like that, where I think one thing for me as a fan that's become harder, more so in basketball than in football, is that like for North Carolina basketball, every year the team is almost entirely different. And you used to be able to, like, one thing I really love about college sports is you'd have players come in and you could see them grow. Someone is on the bench, they start to learn, they get some minutes, they see some potential to become a starter, then they're, all conference. And now every year is just a new, almost always an entirely new team, and high school recruiting matters less. So I think it's harder to live with the players of the team, and it becomes more just the jersey of it, which to me does take some things away from it. There's lots of other great opportunities for players and for others, but it does make it a bit harder.
Yeah, I mean, makes you think about like what Tyler Hansborough's college career would have been. Okay. Like would he have been a 4-year player because he wasn't quite good enough, or is he like big enough? I mean, it's hard to really understand that these days.
Yeah, one thing I do really like about it is like Armando Bacot, North Carolina center, who was there for 5 years, I believe, because he had the COVID year, and things like NIL. There's other players like this recently, like it enables good college players to stay in college longer. And I think that has been really great, as opposed to needing to jump to the NBA. They can make more money in college. And you see that a little bit in college football too. But you also see the reverse, where a player you think you're going to get to love and see grow for 3 or 4 years just goes to another school, and they play at 4 schools every 4 years. And that's certainly like great for them and in their right, but it's harder as a fan, I'd say, for sure.
Yeah,
and the sports realignment thing is really fun and interesting. Like I got to see Michigan play at Rutgers because I live in Philadelphia now, and I got to drive up and see that. Whereas historically, I would have had to fly to Nebraska or to, Ann Arbor or somewhere to see them play.
Yeah, I was at the first ever UCLA Big Ten home game for women's basketball, and it was UCLA Nebraska. And one of the things that the sideline reporter did was ask a fan to like name as many Big Ten schools as they could in I think 10 or 15 seconds, and it was just funny. It was like this wouldn't even be knowledge you need to have a year ago, and yet now here we are.
Yeah.
So shifting gears a little bit to talk about your career, I'm curious if when you were younger you thought about having a job in sports or sports media, and if so, what do you think that job would have been back then?
Yeah, that's a great. I thought you were going to ask about if I dreamt of being a management consultant as a child,
We'll get to that too.
elementary school days. I'd say I've I've always been very interested and attracted to sports, both as a fan and from a media perspective. Like consuming the media, of like you're reading Sports Illustrated, um, you're reading the local paper every day, in addition to watching all your team's games, watching Sports Center, things like that. I don't think I really knew much until maybe even after high school of what different jobs could even look like. So it wasn't something that was a career aspiration, more of a like in retrospect, it's you can kind of see how I got there, but versus something that was an aspiration or even a thing I had knowledge of early on. But I did know I would love to like be part of that universe. And as someone not incredibly athletically gifted, playing the sports maybe wasn't the path there. So it maybe coaching or front office or something like that. But through once we get older into college and after in business school, doing things like being parts of business and sports clubs and things like that was something I did.
Let's talk about consulting, which you referenced, and then also business. So the first part of your career, that was 4 years before you got your MBA and 3 years after, were in strategy consulting. What skills do you think you developed then that you find relevant now? Some of them might be totally not needed in your work at the Athletic, and others are probably tangible and can be helpful in your day-to-day work.
Yeah, no, I think they're pretty much all very directly related. So one of the two or three main reasons I decided to go into strategy management consulting after college is because of it's just a great place to build a foundation of skills that are applicable in almost any field, not just in business management fields. So things like how to work together as part of a team, how to form strategies, how to be data oriented and learn whether that's qualitative data, user research, or quantitative data, how to learn and dig into what the information, what the facts mean, and then what you do about those facts, how to uh, communicate clearly of having to do that to clients as a 22-year-old, how to communicate an action plan or next steps, or how to get people to trust you. Not, and that sounds weird saying it out loud, but like how to build relationships in a way where you're coming and trying to help, or you start at a brand new job and you want everyone to have a good opinion of you. That type of like, how do you start to build uh, show your value early on in a new project. And in consulting, you get exposure to a lot of different industries. You work with a lot of different groups of people very quickly. So you have to get good at getting smart on new topics quickly, learning how to work with new groups of people quickly, blending into new groups quickly, things like that. So it was interesting to me, both from a like, you get to come in and work on interesting, exciting projects in a lot of different areas perspective, and you get to learn these skills that are I'm using them every day at work now.
And I wonder if some of this comes down to era, because I think that for a long time, having an MBA was antithetical to working in sports or in sports media, because you're seen as a suit who doesn't get, the deep knowledge you need that you can only get if you've um, been in the trenches forever as a former player, as a former coach, someone who's come up the ranks. And then I think, in part due to things like the Sloan Sports Analytics Conference, suddenly we have this revolution of analytics. We start to value other skills in sports and sports media. Do you think that influenced what opportunities might have been available to you as your career developed?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I think it'd be impossible to answer this question without also just acknowledging how much has changed in the media landscape, like you said about an era, like from a newspaper or print oriented business where there were lots of business folks with those businesses. They're more about, you know, um, advertising revenue and selling home subscriptions, things like that. Whereas today, in a more digital forward world, all those things still exist, but um, there's all because of the like every business being more analytically oriented and having more of a technology component too. Media businesses have transformed into, you know, no one's paying to read media except like because the user experience is great. Like they're at the end of the day, they're still paying for the journalism, but there's so much like technology work, analytics work, and other business work to help make that business successful and help deliver great experiences around the media, around the journalism to the users who want to pay. That they're kind of like equal partners now in a way where maybe, to your point, they maybe used to be more separate.
Yeah, you work at a place that people pay for sports content, even though there's so much that's freely available, including aggregations of the content that is produced by places like The Athletic. You joined in 2019, and I wonder if you remember any aspect of the user experience from back then, even as just like a reader or a fan of, the website or the app, and whether there were things that you started to notice pretty early on that you wanted to work on or to change in some way.
Vividly, yes. As a product person, one of my jobs is also to be the most critical person of what we're putting out for users. Like always, just wanting it to be as a user myself, but also for the million plus folks who are paying us to use the product. Wanting to make sure they're getting great value and we're delivering something really exciting, compelling to them every day. And as part of my interview process, I had to put together a presentation of a proposal of things to do. So I have 5.5 years now of screenshots on my phone of things in the product experience that I'd like to be better, or things where I find bugs or things like that. I think like to answer your question, it kind of directly relates to the evolution of the athletics, starting a few years before I joined, is starting very locally. There was like Chicago, there was Toronto, like going market by market and building out these teams, but being very focused on the local teams of those areas. And then over time, as the company grew and we got into, you're now covering most teams in all the big leagues, you're covering more national storylines. The one thing that's become very clear is like you can't evolve the mix and volume of the content we're producing without also evolving the product experience alongside it, because all the rules and
Mm.
user experience you put in place no longer work. So like one example thing I noticed is our home feed. You open the app, you go to the website, look at the home feed. Like it was great. It kind of just gave you everything you wanted, but it was uh, all the articles were presented to you just in chronological order, which sometimes makes sense. But there could be a massive story from
Mm.
3 hours ago that you really don't want to miss, and you really want to catch up on things. So one of the things we spent some time doing, just as an example, is orienting some of the those services like the home feed where users can find and discover content to hopefully orient more around how sports fans think about, like, I'm coming in, I want to know what happened in the big games last night, what are the big stories right now, anything new going on with my teams, any new podcasts I can listen to, and kind of orient things just as an example of some things that were frustrating for me that we've hopefully changed a bit since then.
One of the things that I imagine is really challenging for the home feed and the top headlines is thinking about the things people have told you they want. They want to know more about the Knicks, or they want to know more about the Giants and the Jets, or for some reason they want to know about Michigan football and North Carolina basketball on the same feed. But then there's the things that they should hear about, even if maybe they've said, I'm not really a fan of hockey, but this big thing is happening. How do you think about figuring out what they should know and balancing that with what they want to know, and kind of curating that experience?
Yeah, it is. Not a week goes by where this isn't a healthy conversation. So I think about one thing we know users love about the Athletic is that personalized element. Like I've told you what I like, and I've told you what I don't like, or I've told you explicitly at least the things I do like, the teams and leagues and authors I do want to make sure I get. But to your point, that it doesn't mean that's all they want. So this comes up regularly. For example, um, an example person might be a big NBA fan, and they maybe don't follow the WNBA as closely, but really want to know what's going on with Caitlin Clark. Or maybe a
Hmm.
user wants to know like just the biggest headlines in sports, regardless of the biggest thing happening in sports today could be something with a golf tournament or a tennis tournament, right? Like, um, or I don't follow the NFL, but the Super Bowl is happening. So how do you find that right balance? And I think what we've found is a couple things. One is like the personalization is still really important, and that's what users value and want. But that doesn't mean only
Hmm.
this and not other things. Like you have to, in the moment, help users find things that um, give them the ability to find those things they might also be interested in. So there are other ways we could do that. For example, like maybe you want to opt into the top stories of the day that we can pair with the stuff from your favorite teams and leagues. Or maybe we could make it easier for you to search for content or find content. Or maybe we can use email and push to help find things. The one thing you said explicitly, which I think is really hard for us and probably for every media company, is that how do you think about the explicitly like things we think you should know about? Because on the one hand, like we have a great editorial team and the editorial judgment is a really important thing. Like if you think about like the New York Times homepage or the Washington Post, like any newspaper, it's like that's what the editors of that paper think you should know right now. But we also know that if you do too much of that, users really don't like it. So it's hard to find that balance. And that's also where one of the things we've done just to wrap up this thought is like do a better job of blending the algorithm that gets put, you know, on top of it with like, you've told us all the things you care about. We know which things you read more or less, so we can try to do a better job of putting the things you want right in front of you, with also the editorial judgment of like letting the newsroom organize and showcase content to you in a thoughtful way.
How is this evolving now with video? Because The Athletic recently introduced NBA highlights. I think literally this week introduced NHL highlights. And
Yes.
those are both on your home feed, but then they're also embedded in the articles. I've noticed, for example, in the Bounce, Zach Harper is now doing a video version of the Bounce sometimes in addition to the actual written newsletter. I imagine that helps you on social media, but is it also just helping you with engagement within the articles?
Yeah, great question. I appreciate your dedication to the product and your research as a host of this show. So yes, we did recently launch highlights. So for a couple of things, one is like while The Athletic also has a large podcast offering in on platform and web and app, mostly we offer long form written content. But we know when you look at, and we do user research, we market research, we surveys, and just as sports fans ourselves, many of us, we know that one of the main things users really want to do is just watch the thing and watch and learn or watch a recap or watch.
Mm-hmm.
And you see that not just what we hear when we talk to our users, but when you look at just industry trends of where engagement in sports are happening, there's YouTube, it's happening more in YouTube and other, social media where there's more video in it getting paired with the written content. So for us, it was really important to start, I think, eventually to address that and start bringing more video into the product. And we're really excited about both what you said. There's the highlights part of it where we can kind of blend the highlights everyone loves with what we can really add differentiated value on, which is our huge newsroom, the biggest
Mm-hmm.
sports newsroom. So having them like layer in insights on top of the highlight video to help explain what's going on or why this was important. And then also pair that with reporter video where maybe the beat writer for one of your favorite teams, instead of writing a whole long article, can just come on also and say like, here's three things you need to know coming out of training camp today or before the trade deadline or whatever to make it easier, as you said, to make it easier for users to consume content in a different way and maybe not have to always read a really long article to get that snippet you're really looking for. And then our job on the home feed is how do you package that all together well, which we're starting to do with highlights for the NHL and NBA.
I imagine that A/B testing and trying different versions of things is such a big part of this. I'm curious if you're able to share if there's the most minor tweak that any user would probably have no sense that it happened, and yet it really drives engagement or return visits or whatever it might be.
Oh, interesting. Um, I'd have to think about that one a little bit. There was definitely no, we changed this color from green to brown, and four times as many people clicked on it. It's not as much of that. In general,
Yeah.
though, what you said is right. Like we we have gotten much more rigorous around how we A/B test and what we A/B test over the last couple of years, and we actually just launched a new tool to help us do even more of that. It is really important also to help us. one of the most interesting parts of working in sports is that because many of us are sports fans, we have opinions of what good looks like. But one of my
Hmm.
responsibilities as the head of product is to remind everyone that that doesn't mean that's what everyone else thinks. So as much as we can
Mm.
pull in user research and things like that and use our own judgment, at the end of the day, like we have a very large user base and not everyone wants the same things. So the testing
Hmm.
is important to also like keep ourselves in check and give us more confidence that the things we're doing are actually valued by users, not just things users
Hmm.
say they want. And sometimes things users say they want, we could build and maybe we don't deliver it the right way. So our heart's in the right place, we just don't execute it well, or maybe we can keep changing the user experience on something to make it better. So that, as you said, you're right, that is really important. And so for us, it's less about the small tweaks and it's more about when we're launching any new feature, um, how do we make sure it's valuable for users, not just a thing that we think is cool.
So much like that goes back and forth between all of these decisions, and I imagine there's the mix of data and human parts, and that is the fascinating part as like careers evolve. Is you don't work for the Yankees or the Jets. You aren't leading a cover band, which you list on your resume as your dream job. But in some ways, you have what many people with similar backgrounds, maybe people who worked in consulting or have an MBA, would consider to be a desirable career destination. You get to use data insights, analytics, and operational knowledge to make a sports product that people love, and they love it because they pay you to consume it. If you were talking to someone who's interested in developing a similar career path, they want to work on sports, but they also want to work on like the business or product side, what would you encourage them to think about in terms of skill development or career pursuit that would maybe help them get a start?
Yeah. I think my advice would change a bit depending on the lens of which path we go down. It is, as I said, like this was not an on purpose thing that I had well-intentioned design for. Like when I was looking for a new job 5.5 years, 6 years ago, and I came upon The Athletic and had put myself in a position to um, get a role here. It's not like I had come in from other sports jobs. So maybe just taking that further as a example answer to your question, like I think so much to an extent, like knowing the direction you want to go down is really important and being purposeful with that. Like when I left consulting and wanted to come into product, I found it very difficult to, it's very hard to get a product job if you haven't had a product job.
Mm-hmm.
So um, I was very purposeful about coming into an adjacent area, which was product marketing, so I could be adjacent to product and then try to move into it. So it wasn't purposeful about getting into sports, but it was purposeful about wanting to be in product as a every company is a tech company. So being central to the business and central to the user experience, like I want to create great things people want to use and want to pay for. So I was purposeful about that transition. And then just putting yourself in a position where, it's like luck is a combination of, or like good fortune is a combination of like skill and stuff and also a lot of luck. But you have to put yourself
Mm-hmm.
in position so that when those opportunities arise, you can capitalize on them. So this sounds crazy, but like, if you work hard and do a really good job and um, people are willing to refer you or speak highly of you, or when you go apply somewhere else, they can see the impact of all the work you've done and kind of connect the dots. And I think that's something I was able to do was when I was able to get an introduction into the athletic, I was able to frame up my past experiences in a way that was directly applicable to the athletic, even though I hadn't worked in sports
Mm-hmm.
or in media before. And because ultimately my job is a like business strategy and technology job where you can apply that to sports the same way you could apply it to somewhere else. So for this type of role, having sports experience was less important than having the functional experience and being a big sports fan and being really um, uh, excited about the role.
Sounds like rooting for the Tar Heels and the Wolverines and a mix of other New York, New Jersey sports teams somehow turned into this amazing career. And we really
Yeah,
appreciate you taking the time to share a little bit more about the athletic and to be the first guest on Get a Load of This.
yeah, this was great. Thank you.